Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. In 2025, a single decision sent shockwaves through global commerce, reverberating across continents and boardrooms alike. The world awoke to headlines that would redefine the rules of international trade overnight. In a move that stunned economists and diplomats, the Trump administration imposed a sweeping 50% tariff on all goods imported from India. This was not a minor adjustment or a targeted sanction, it was a bold, unprecedented escalation in the ongoing battle over global trade. The tariff was a blunt act of economic warfare, not a carefully calibrated tool. It instantly jeopardized a $212 billion trading relationship, sending shockwaves through supply chains and boardrooms from Mumbai to Manhattan. Decades of strategic partnership, built on trust and mutual benefit, were suddenly thrown into doubt. Justified under the controversial banner of national security, the move invoked emergency powers typically reserved for hostile states. This signaled a dramatic and unsettling shift in U.S. trade policy, raising questions about the future of American alliances and the stability of the global order. The immediate result was chaos. Indian industries, deeply integrated with the American market, faced existential threats overnight. Factories halted production, workers feared for their jobs, and business leaders scrambled to find new buyers and alternative markets. The tariff shattered the foundation of the U.S.-India alliance, forcing New Delhi to question its most important international relationship. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent calls as Indian officials weighed retaliation and reconsidered their nation's place in the world order. For other nations, the message was clear: no partnership was safe from this new era of American protectionism. Allies and rivals alike began to rethink their own strategies, wary of sudden policy shifts that could upend years of cooperation. Economic diversification was no longer optional, it was a matter of survival. Around the globe, companies and governments accelerated efforts to reduce dependence on any single market, bracing for a future where uncertainty was the only constant. For India, the sudden imposition of the tariff was nothing short of an economic earthquake, sending shockwaves through the nation's financial heart. Export sectors, gems, garments, shrimp, suddenly faced collapse, as orders from their largest overseas customer evaporated almost overnight. The impact was immediate and devastating, threatening millions of jobs and entire regional economies that depended on global trade. Prime Minister Modi, who had staked his foreign policy on deepening ties with the United States, now faced a crisis of both economics and trust, as confidence in the partnership was shaken. The tariff was seen as a betrayal by many in India's business and political circles, forcing the country to urgently seek new markets and allies to cushion the blow. Small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of Indian manufacturing and employment, were hit hardest, with many struggling to survive as exports plummeted and supply chains stalled. Unemployment soared and social distress spread rapidly, as families across the country faced uncertainty and hardship, with little safety net to fall back on. In a dramatic and unexpected pivot, India began reaching out to China, setting up a high-level summit with President Xi, an unthinkable move just a year earlier, signaling a major shift in regional alliances. Washington's aggressive trade policy was not just isolating adversaries but also alienating key allies and undermining its own Indo-Pacific strategy, as trust in American leadership eroded. The crisis exposed the dangers of over-reliance on a single market, highlighting the urgent need for India to diversify its trade relationships and reduce vulnerability to external shocks. As India's search for new partners began in earnest, the country stood at a crossroads, determined to rebuild, adapt, and secure its place in a rapidly changing global economy. As India reeled from the shockwaves of the global trade crisis, its markets and business leaders scrambled to adapt to a rapidly changing landscape. The world watched as the effects rippled outward, touching economies far beyond South Asia. Canada, too, found itself at a crossroads, facing its own trade crisis as exports faltered and investor confidence wavered. The Canadian financial sector braced for impact, while headlines warned of a looming economic downturn. Prime Minister Mark Carney, a seasoned expert in global finance and former central banker, stepped into the spotlight. Rather than resorting to confrontation, Carney charted a course of strategic de-escalation, determined to protect Canada's interests without fueling further instability. In a bold move, Canada lifted most retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. This unexpected gesture signaled a willingness to negotiate, surprising many in Washington and effectively isolating the most protectionist voices in the U.S. administration. The decision was calculated to open the door for renewed dialogue and cooperation. At home, Carney's government introduced and swiftly passed the One Canadian Economy Act. This landmark legislation broke down long-standing internal trade barriers between provinces, encouraging businesses to look inward and strengthening the domestic market. The act also aimed to reduce Canada's heavy dependence on U.S. exports, fostering greater economic resilience. In a further effort to stimulate growth and ease the burden on industry, Canada abolished the federal carbon tax, a move that sparked heated debate across the country. Supporters hailed it as a necessary step for competitiveness, while critics warned of environmental consequences. Simultaneously, the government accelerated major infrastructure projects nationwide, investing in roads, bridges, and public transit to create jobs and inject momentum into the economy. These projects were designed not only to provide immediate relief, but also to lay the foundation for long-term prosperity. On the international stage, Carney made a clear commitment. Canada would meet NATO defense spending targets, signaling a new era of strategic autonomy and a willingness to shoulder greater responsibility within the alliance. Canada's multi-pronged response, combining diplomatic outreach, sweeping economic reforms, and a more assertive foreign policy, marked a decisive shift in its global posture. The country was no longer content to simply follow, it was ready to lead. Like India, Canada now found itself compelled to forge a more independent path, redefining its role on the world stage and embracing the challenges of a new era with determination and vision. Just a year earlier, Canada and India's relationship was frozen by a bitter diplomatic dispute over alleged Indian involvement in attacks on Sikh separatists in Canada. Trust was shattered and communication ceased. But the shared threat of U.S. tariffs forced both nations to reconsider. At the G7 summit in Alberta, Prime Ministers Carney and Modi met, agreeing to fully restore diplomatic ties and appoint new ambassadors. This pragmatic move set aside old grievances in favor of cooperation. Canada named veteran diplomat Christopher Cooter as High Commissioner to New Delhi. India appointed Dinesh Patnaik to Ottawa. These were not token gestures, but deliberate steps to reset the relationship. The diplomatic freeze ended, and a new strategic alignment began. The Carney-Modi partnership marks a major realignment, driven by the need to defend free trade against American protectionism. Their collaboration is pragmatic, focused on building a coalition of middle powers for economic resilience. Talks accelerated on a comprehensive trade agreement, opening India's vast market to Canadian businesses and vice versa. For India, Canada became a vital new destination for goods blocked from the U.S. Both nations aim to build resilient supply chains, less dependent on the US or China. Joint ventures, Canadian tech firms with Indian developers, Indian manufacturers in Canada, began to take shape. The alliance shifted both countries' foreign policies away from US dependence toward a multipolar world. The era of relying on a single superpower was over. A new model of cooperation was emerging. Behind the headlines, the trade war's human cost is stark. In Jaipur, Indian artisans lost livelihoods as U.S. orders vanished overnight. In Canada, steel workers in towns like Hamilton faced layoffs and factory closures due to U.S. tariffs. Businesses scrambled to find new markets. Indian textile firms pivoted to Europe and Canada, while Canadian manufacturers sought new supply chains. These adjustments were costly and slow, especially for small firms. The disruption rippled through families and communities, turning trade policy into a matter of daily survival. Trade is not just numbers, it's people, jobs, and futures. The uncertainty of tariff wars affects everything from mortgages to hiring decisions. The human toll underscores the urgent need for cooperative solutions over economic nationalism. The U.S. tariffs on India and Canada are redrawing the global trade map, accelerating a shift from a U.S.-centric system to a fragmented multipolar world. Nations are rapidly diversifying partnerships, building new trade corridors that bypass the U.S. The Canada-India alliance is just one example. Similar blocs are forming worldwide. Middle powers are forging networks to buffer against American unpredictability. Even old rivals like India and China are setting aside differences in the face of economic threats. The U.S. risks isolating itself, while new centers of economic gravity emerge. The crisis may ultimately create a more resilient, distributed global trading system. America First, meant to protect U.S. interests, is backfiring. By imposing punitive tariffs on allies like India and Canada, the U.S. is undermining its own strategic goals and pushing partners toward rivals. The alliance system that underpinned global stability is eroding as trust and predictability vanish. American consumers face higher prices and businesses struggle with disrupted supply chains. Retaliatory measures and uncertainty hurt U.S. exporters, making America less competitive. The policy is accelerating a post-American world, where nations build new systems independent of U.S. leadership. The Canada-India partnership is a direct result. Two democracies forging new rules in response to U.S. actions. America's influence is waning and its leadership is no longer assured. The trade crisis offers powerful lessons for a multipolar world. First, economic diversification is essential. Over-reliance on one partner is a vulnerability. Second, middle power diplomacy matters. Canada and India showed that pragmatic cooperation can counterbalance superpower actions. Third, protectionism's limits are clear. Tariffs trigger retaliation, disrupt supply chains, and erode trust. The U.S. experience proves there are no easy wins in a trade war. Self-harm is inevitable in an interconnected world. Most importantly, cooperation remains the best path forward. The Canada-India partnership proves that even amid rivalry, collaboration is possible. The future of global trade depends on nations choosing cooperation over confrontation. Only then can we build a more stable, inclusive, and prosperous world. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel for more updates.